Hello, my name is Abby. I am one of the tutors here at Eng Lang Pro, and welcome to the ELP YouTube channel. All of us tutors have scored a raw 46 or above, and whether you're aiming for that 45, 50, or that 40 plus, even just a 30 plus, maybe you just like English language in the VCE sense or in general, we are here to help you out on your English language journey. Today is quite an important topic, almost in the sense of strategy, in the sense of for your end of year exam, your essay has to cover every single bit as much as possible in the study design. This means our Unit 3 work on formality and informality has to be in your essay, even if it's a more identity focused question, vice versa, right? So if it's a more formality, maybe prescriptivist question, you're still going to have to include your Unit 4, your language variation in Australian society. Your identity kind of elements have to be in your essay in your exam. So you essentially have to make sure you're getting as much as possible for your examiners attitudes, register, context, purposes, functions, identity, language variation. I'm going to run through sort of some common mistakes, how to do it, and we're going to have a breakdown with a essay prompt being answered with a fake essay paragraph. So just a quick reminder of what it means that you actually have to cover then. For Unit 3, it's informality. Area Study 2, formality. Unit 4, language variation in Australian society and individual and group identities. To put it kind of a little bit more simply, you want to make sure you're at least talking about register, Unit 3, and then at least talking about identity, attitudes, belief, etc. in Unit 4. Now, I have intentionally inserted the requirements of the 2024 VCAT exam to really hammer home just how important it is as a staple that you touch on both areas of study. So in your section C essay instructions, this is a direct screenshot. You can see we have in your response, you have to demonstrate you can use meta language. So basically just use your meta language, use it well, be accurate, and then the final point there, refer to the stimulus material provided. And then this middle one, demonstrate familiarity with the topics of Unit 3 and the topics of Unit 4. So basically, at the core of it, at the crux of what they're asking you to do in your essay, along with the meta language and the stimulus, our third basic pinpoint that we have to do is use the year's worth of content. Show off everything you know, not just from your learning in October, say if your exam's at the end of October or early November. It's one of the basics, and it's often perhaps more forgotten about than meta language. If we're going a little bit deeper of, okay, well, great, I have to do everything. It sounds super hard. What does that actually mean? The back of the exam paper has the assessment criteria. And you can see there's quite a few more dot points here. Very similar in style, right? So the first one, we just have to use meta language, make sure we're getting our features and functions correct. We have to analyze linguistic features, very similar, and making sure we're hitting all our registers. And then we get into a bit more of what they're actually expecting when they're trying to pinpoint the Unit 4 stuff. So we need relationship between language and identity. We need the different attitudes of Australian English and of identities. And then we need to make sure that we have the basics of it's contemporary, it's modern, it's not a sort of historical look at language. And then because it's English, we still have to try and write to the best of our ability something that's quite coherent, cohesive, well formulated, perhaps even more of a formal register, etc. So bearing in mind that this is our assessment criteria, and this is kind of the 3 dot points of what you have to do with your essay, I want to raise with you a few common traps that we usually see when we're trying to write essays. And these are the main 2 ones. And the kind of summary for both of them is that we seem to forget Unit 3. Now, whether it's because Unit 3 occurred like the furthest away in the year, so in your mind, if you think, well, I'm going to remember what's recent, it makes sense to forget Unit 3. Maybe perhaps it's also forming the basis of such our underlying meta language that we might see more about AC and SAQ, that we almost kind of forget to insert it in Unit 4. Or the other way is that we almost get too focused on having a recount of meta language, forgetting that we have to actually kind of discuss a few of the Unit 3 ideas, maybe prescriptivism, descriptivism, or actually incorporate identity as well. So the two ones I've got on the board here, and what I want you to think, I want you to pinpoint in your own writing if you think you're a student that falls into these categories. A lot of the time, the best way to improve is rewriting essays over and over again. Myself and everyone else at the ELP team and a lot of other people that have scored highly use that strategy. Rewrite an essay, be your biggest critic, use criteria like I have up on the screen to see, okay, where do I fit in? Where am I potentially kind of losing it a bit? So the first one, getting focused on identity, specifically, right, focusing too much on Unit 4. A lot of the time, you kind of just accidentally get into this whole idea of writing away from language. You're sort of using your contemporary examples, but you might be just discussing, well, Australian identities are changing, and this shows that Australian identities are changing, instead of using your language as that springboard to say, well, our language is changing too, or our language is the driving force behind change, something like that. Focusing a bit too much on the societal repercussions, getting a little bit too almost enthusiastic about that. Or kind of the inverse, a common reason why this occurs is that you might be running out of contemporary examples to discuss. For your essay, ideally, kind of at a minimum, you want to have 3 body paragraphs with 2 contemporary examples each. This means that you want at least 6 in your entire essay that you are bringing to the table, and then potentially incorporating a quote from stimulus or an actual example and kind of digesting it, statistics from stimulus, etc. in your essay. If you feel as though you don't have 6 to 8 at least minimum contemporary examples that are of high quality, that are recent, that you're really confident and passionate to discuss, then you're likely going to be falling into the first trap there of getting too focused on identity, not having enough language to actually kind of break down and digest. Similarly, it can also happen if when you get your prompt, you might be a student that goes, okay, I'm going to try and put all 4 elements of stimulus into my prompt. A lot of the time, that ultimately just leads to sort of feeling like you're recycling the ideas of the exam prompt and the stimulus itself, rather than kind of coming in from this creative angle with your new ideas and your new examples. Really, the whole way to bypass this first point here of getting too focused on identity is to be super confident with your meta language, super confident with your examples, and so you can really get more of that analysis needed. Now, the second one, kind of the inverse problem, is getting too focused on meta language. The biggest format and way that I usually see this occur is when you may have a quote or contemporary example that is a little bit too long, and then you end up just analyzing the syntactics of it, the semantics of it, maybe a noun phrase is doing this, etc., etc. If you end up feeling like you're spending half a page just breaking down the meta language sort of methodically, you're highly likely going to be running out of time, of paragraph space, to actually be incorporating that Unit 3 work, like discussing the purpose or the register or the audience and those kind of bigger picture ideas. Now, one of the best ways to actually spot when this is happening is if you take a breather, especially if you've written this in time conditions, say your mid-year exam, etc. You reread the paragraph or the essay that you have written, and you might find, okay, well, my analysis looks good, but all of a sudden I'm making a really rushed link to society and then moving on to my next paragraph. If you're missing that kind of chunky, beefier middle moment of digesting and discussing the links to society, sort of that link to the Unit 4 and Unit 3 bigger concepts, it's highly likely you're falling into this category. I'm going to kind of go through now how you can bypass both, keeping in mind that no matter what category here, to get our overall goal of meeting all this assessment criteria, our biggest use the year's worth of content, the main issue most of us are running into is that you're not including Unit 3 in your essays. So, 4 main things that I think are insanely easy when you put your mind to it to make sure they're included in your essay, and then you never have to worry about this whole Unit 3 conundrum again. So tenor, purpose and intent, audience, and register are the specific meta language listed in the study design, which you can almost use as synonyms whenever you discuss a concept. So say you want to talk about the vibe, or how your example impacted the tone, or it impacted the situation, etc. Instead of using words like that, just use tenor. And instantly you're reinforcing a bit of meta language. You're kind of getting that meta language mark, so to speak, when just by substituting a word, you don't even have to change the sentence you're writing. Similarly, right? A lot of the time we might talk about the goal of something, etc., etc. When you're thinking, well, what if I don't know how to include that in my essay? Every single contemporary example that you have is going to have a goal. It is going to have a purpose. So when you're deconstructing and breaking down your example, think, okay, well, what was this person trying to achieve? Why did they write this? Did they say this in the first place? What was the context of them saying or writing this? Now, audience very much flows on from purpose and intent, and I think it can be a little bit harder to make sure you hit. A lot of the time, students will be fine with the blue and say they wanted to do this or they wanted to do that. The audience is literally just putting a tiny phrase, another clause, using the power of a comma to just add on, well, who was actually impacted? Now, a lot of the time, especially if you're the first student, that feels like you might struggle a little bit having too much of a Unit 4 identity, sort of societal implications in your essay. By making sure that you address who the reader is, who was impacted by your contemporary example, you're already helping to rebut potentially a tendency of yours. Now, a good question that I would always like to think about is, well, who did the person that made this example actually aim to impact? A lot of the time, say if it's an online example, it's super public. Your speaker, your writer might have a really narrow audience. They might be trying to only target high school students. But because it's a public place, they might be targeting everyone. And so you might have this audience of high school students in the more in-group having one opinion in reaction to it, whilst on the other hand, this kind of out-group, this wider audience having another one. This is closely aligned with purpose and intent. Essentially, for audience, you just want to go that little bit further and be explicit when you say who was impacted, even if it is just the Australian audience, for example. Now, the final one is register, and I've put it last because I sort of believe this is kind of the most important if we're getting technical, but also at the same hand, potentially the most easy to incorporate. Now, I say register is most important because it is half of your study design practically. It is all of Unit 3. Now, to make sure we don't forget it, arguably a very important thing, is that every time you introduce an example, just make sure you comment on its register. Now, this will be more important in some scenarios than most because sometimes the register of a piece is actually really, really important. You can choose how much you say want to break down, give me another sentence or two about the register, or just say highly informal writing. For example, I've got two up here that I think are usually quite fun themes that you can discuss. If you bring to the table, to your examiner, a online, really informal piece of writing, this is an element of context that it's by a younger speaker, that it's online, that it's on social media. And so it's going to be really important that you comment on the fact that it's written informally. It's reflecting all these elements of context. On the other hand, if it is a person in power and authority, and they choose to speak really formally, it's probably going to reflect a increase or a reinforcing of their authority. And so it's going to be important that you comment on, well, why are they doing it? Why do they want to have this authority? Why? So does this give them authority because their audience is potentially without it? Purpose and intent, audience, even tenor is being able to be touched on. I know it's really hard sometimes to extract all the different elements of context, like the four I've got color-coded here. A lot of the time, they can be very much interlinked. And instead of seeing that as a weakness or a challenge, see it as a great way to ensure that you can hit all of your Unit 3 content without having to insert a sentence that doesn't make any sense, because everything can flow on from one another. So the final thing I'm going to go through is a little bit of an example in a essay paragraph. The topic I've put in all caps here is language and identity are inextricably linked. Straight away when we read the topic, we can see, okay, this is like a Unit 4 question. This is mainly asking me, well, language and identity, language variation in Australian society, individual group identities. Whoa, I'm chilling. My Unit 4 that I just started learning from July to October, November, that's going to see me through. In reality, no, because one of the 3 stock standard things that we have to do is talk about both elements, both Unit 3, register, and Unit 4. Now, take note of the color coding here. I've color coded a few areas in which Unit 3 is explicitly discussed, matching up with these. The link is in the description if you want to read it for yourself. I'm going to go through and read it for you. This is kind of an example of how you're using a Unit 4 predominant idea and paragraph, and then inserting Unit 3 as kind of like this overlay on top to make sure that you're still overtly fostering and encouraging the whole year's worth of content. This is theoretically the 3rd paragraph in an essay. I'm making my point and I'm going to read it for you now. So, unlike ethnicity and gender, which can present themselves very visibly, as part of a person's identity, the connotations associated with Australian English accents really can only occur once language is vocalized by a speaker. Variations to either a broad, general, or cultivated accent can greatly impact the identity that someone displays. You can see quite straight up, I've gone broad, general, or cultivated. I'm showing I understand Unit 4, Area of Study 1, so language variation in Australian society. Next little bit after I've given my introduction. You can see that these sentences I've broken up into different lines, and this first part has 2 different sentences. A lot of the time it is okay to have a broader topic sentence, like language, accents of speakers is not a visible trait, and then to break it down deeper with what you mean using meta-language, like I've done here with my broad, general, or cultivated. Alrighty, let's get into it. So, changing societal attitudes around prescriptivism and class has seen the broad Australian accent grow in popularity over time, and more recently, individuals can exploit this when wishing to construct a friendly and down-to-earth identity. Straight away, I'm also hitting another element, which is prescriptivism. I've colored it in brown to kind of relate it back to being a more general Unit 3 concept, and even a concept that's been from Units 1 to 4. Before I get into my example, the reason why this is here is to just background a little bit of the example and why I'm going to say, examiner, this is actually really important to pay attention to. For example, the 2023 app Invest in Your Farmer utilizes construction ya as an informal written reference to vowel reduction typical of the broad Australian accent. You can see that this sentence pretty much functions as a discussion about identity. If I was to remove the pink informal, it would say as a written reference. And that completely works. I'm using the opportunity to go, okay, this is quite informal. You're not going to see it, say, in the title, typically of an app. We're kind of getting a bit more language play. I'm going to just allude to that. I'm going to insert that really quickly. And I'm kind of getting that Unit 3 overlay without having to put in too much effort. Similarly, the target audience, people investing on the app, most likely want to feel authentically involved in investing, i.e. non-farmers feeling like farmers. I've specifically chosen to phrase this sentence in a way that I can use the word audience, not target demographic, the people that Invest in Your Farmer wants to have on the app. I use audience because it's part of our elements of context. It's really signposting that I can methodically think about language from the perspective of its register, the perspective of its audience. Now let's keep going. The use of inya appeals to this desire because it reflects the stereotypes of how a farmer should speak, adhering to the positive face needs of those investing, creating an inviting tenor by making them feel authentically involved. Similar thing here, we have the brown positive face needs, another kind of outside link to a Unit 3 idea. And then with the insertion of tenor, it's very similar to the pink informal at the top. If you could say read it as, of those investing by making them feel authentically involved, inserting this inviting tenor really just cements this understanding of all elements of context. For your essay, it's still important that you kind of try to sneak as much in. If you're a student that feels like you're number 2 and you're struggling in the sense of you keep adding too much meta-language, can you see how this is meta-language in and of itself? Informal, audience, tenor, positive face needs are all meta-language, but it's a type of meta-language that links to an outside element of context. Really, what you have to do in your AC and what you have to do in your essay in terms of actually breaking something down is really similar. It's just in our essay, we're using that meta-language that is a bit more about the bigger picture ideas. Alrighty, Now I'm going to quickly show you how I would link another contemporary example, and you can see from the colors I'm making sure I tick off all 4 of kind of my main Unit 3 concepts. So, other uses of BAE, however, have not been as successful, as people have the ability to essentially see through a person's actually identity. For example, Queensland MLC Pangello recently stated on a live platform X, we're adding another 236 ambos. The hyperchoristic slang noun ambos, take note that meta language is still there, it's just not super prevalent, intended to reflect a broad Australian accent, constructing a down-to-earth identity. Very much a Unit 4 sentence with that purpose and intent inserted there in the blue. However, many politically aware Australian people could see through such language usage, stating that as someone who is a politician, a more formal noun such as paramedic should have been used instead. This sentence kind of hits 2 birds with 1 stone, and it's trying to be as specific as possible with the audience. For your AC, when the audience is not guaranteed, you might just want to have it relatively broad, right? You don't know who might be listening to the radio at 5 p.m. on a Sunday. Here, for your essay, you can make a bit more of a claim about the nicheness of an audience. Here, when I'm writing about the kind of feedback or the pushback, the critical response with people saying, well, a more formal noun such as paramedic should be used, I'm allowed to judge a little bit more kind of subjectively on who, as a student that knows my contemporary example quite well, wants to kind of go and refine my audience. Here, I'm kind of relating to the domain of politics as I'm discussing a speaker add another 236 ambo, so kind of invertedly a kind of policy has been made, etc. And so I'm making sure that I kind of inadvertently tell what the domain is whilst I'm also saying the audience. So politically aware Australian people. And then I wrap up my paragraph. Also, uses can bend the connotations of language constructing an alternative identity. This can be to a limited success. So, whilst this is still a paragraph about identity, you can see this final sentence, identity. These first few sentences, introduction, predominantly identity. I am really mindful with my language choice, especially when I'm in the meat of discussing my example, to make sure that I hit one of the basic requirements, which is that you need to use the year's worth of content. Demonstrate familiarity with the topics of Unit 3 and the topics of Unit 4. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you very much for watching. I highly recommend you check out more videos on the ELP YouTube channel, or consider signing up with ELP tutoring in general. Check out our website. Thank you very much, and good luck with all your SACs and exams, EngLang students.